well-placed music without a single word attached to it can be a very, very powerful call to action. There's a lot going on inside your brain when music starts playing, and even more when you start singing.
As a young person, that appealed to me, that it was different. It also didn't force me to think too much.
Participation here is crucial.
Yes.
They need for you to be involved. I did gauge a lot of the success in what I was doing with music ministry by how people responded. That is the goal of a good worship service, is to get everyone on the same page so that they can experience the same message and respond to it in a similar way.
Welcome to Unbound,
A podcast for new atheists,
and lifetime atheists,
ex-evangelicals.
truth seekers, and free thinkers.
There is life after faith.
And life here is good. It's time for a new perspective.
And a better conversation. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle, and it's time to get unbound.
Now, I understand that Jim Bakker is back and that he's basically trying to develop a global Blue Man group. Is this his intention with this?
Hey, he could possibly do it.
He probably could. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle.
And tonight we're going to be talking about church music, worship services, all of the things that go into this formula and gets your brain into the place where it needs to be for some good old-fashioned indoctrination. But before that, I just teased what Shelle's working on for this week's Christians Behaving Badly. Brace yourselves, people. Jim Bakker is back.
Jim Bakker has never left.
Well, that's not what I mean. He's back on Unbound for another segment, 2 or 3 weeks later?
Yes.
Because he's just that ridiculous? Okay,
he is that ridiculous.
Tell them about it.
Well, apparently Jim Bakker is selling Silver Solution, which is a colloidal silver liquid, I guess, as a cure for the coronavirus. And
is he actually doing what the Goop people are doing and literally marketing it as a cure?
Yeah, colloidal silver has been like a cure-all for the alternative healthcare market for a long time. He had a naturopath on his show recently that said that the silver solution hasn't been tested on this strain of the coronavirus, but it's been shown by other strains to have been killed within 12 hours, after which your immune system is supposed to sweep away the virus.
Yeah, but here's the problem. If you've got a virus that is this pervasive, that is causing these kinds of problems, that typically means that it's a strain that's not going to respond to vaccinations or to anything else that you could do to try and slow it down.
Yes, but the silver solution is supposed to kill the virus first, and then your immune system is supposed to be boosted by the same colloidal silver. Unfortunately, that doesn't work.
No, because it's not a vaccine.
It's also not a medicine of any sort.
Oh.
Your body does not need silver for anything. According to the Mayo Clinic, colloidal silver is not considered safe or effective for any of the health claims that their manufacturers make. It has no known purpose in the body, and it's not an essential mineral for the body.
Okay, so does he provide any kind of disclaimers or anything like that in any of these videos that you watched? Does he even come close to saying that any of this is his opinion and not scientific fact?
No, he doesn't have anything on there. Most of these places don't. They usually have some sort of blanket disclaimer that it might not work for everyone. But the point is that it doesn't work, period. And if you take it for a long period of time and you take it like daily for like several years, you will start to turn blue. Literally
blue.
Yes.
You'll be a Smurf with a thyroid problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Extremely. And it's unsafe. I mean, I don't know if it kills you, but it definitely turns you blue. And even if you stop taking colloidal silver, the blue does not go away.
Now, here's my take on this. If my skin's not supposed to be blue, but this stuff will eventually turn my skin blue, it doesn't belong in there.
No, it does not.
It doesn't belong in there. How much is he charging for this shit?
Well, I think that, let's see, a 16-ounce bottle costs $40, but shoppers can purchase bundles of the product that cost up to $300.
And that should turn them blue in, what, a couple of weeks?
That should turn them blue.
It should turn them blue pretty quick.
The thing is that the coronavirus has no current vaccine. There's no vaccine for it. There's no real cure. It just needs supportive treatment.
Right.
And also common sense preventative measures that you take for anything like the flu.
And you would have had to have been in some very specific parts of the world to have any significant chance of contracting this.
Or be in an area where there is a person who contracted the virus and is now present.
Right.
So they would have had to be in Wuhan, China.
Right, yeah.
For that. But most of the doctors that I've heard talk about this say, if you're concerned, get the flu shot. You have a more of a chance of contracting flu. You have more of a chance of dying of flu because the influenza virus is extremely dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
But get the flu shot because at least it will boost your immunity for that.
I've started getting flu shots.
Yes.
I finally caved and started getting flu shots.
I don't get as sick.
No, I've actually felt better.
Yeah.
I've actually felt better through this winter. And I'm not sure how much it has to do with the flu shot, but I do know that years ago when I was getting them through my workplace, I went entire winters without ever getting sick, at all. So I'm not sure precisely everything that shot does for you, but it does good things.
Yeah.
This stuff does not do good things.
No.
This stuff is the definition of snake oil.
Oh, yeah.
Being sold by the definition of a snake.
Yeah. Pretty much.
I'll tell you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
This, and every single time you bring up one of these stories and we start talking about Jim Bakker, it starts with an eye roll and then it sort of ends off with, how the fuck is he getting away with this?
No, I
well,
don't
how
know.
is Gwyneth Paltrow getting away with the whole goop thing?
She's got a Netflix series now.
She's got a series, and they make flat out blatant claims that this shit will do things that there is no scientific evidence that it could possibly do.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing here. Is it because they're celebrities? They get away with the shit because they're famous? Is that really what it boils down to?
You've got me. I can't figure it out. But there's a real pseudoscience problem in this country right now.
Yeah, it's true. And god-awful movies just took apart the first episode. I think it was the first episode of that Goop series.
It was the fifth episode.
Fifth
I forget
episode,
what that concentrated on, but it was a thing.
Yeah, I think my brain kind of sort of purged most of it. I was more interested in what the guys were saying to poke fun at it than I was ever trying to understand. This had every element of a really poorly thought out MLM.
Yeah.
I that was the very first thing that I thought of when I heard just clips from this series. It's like these people look and act and clearly think just like the people did in Amway. Oh, and by the way, sooner or later, we should definitely do an episode on our time in Amway.
Oh, God,
mostly because of how they integrate the evangelical thing with it and how they use those same principles in their marketing. So, little light bulb just went off. We got to do that sooner or later because neither you nor I are fans of MLM.
Oh, no.
No, not even remotely. So, and Amway is one of those that just really, really integrated it. And I hear whispers of all kinds of stuff that we heard in that time when I hear about these idiots hawking this shit just like Jim Bakker is right now. Do you have anything else before we move on?
No, I am done with Jim Bakker.
You're done with Jim Bakker. That's the second time now that you said that you're done with Jim Bakker.
Oh, I'm sure he'll turn up again.
He'll be back.
He'll be back.
He'll be back.
But so will I.
Yep, and so will I. Real quick before we get into the main part of our show, I just want to make a quick appeal for support on a bunch of levels. I will quickly mention again that our Patreon links are all over everything. It's just a click away. You have no idea what kind of a difference a bunch of people giving just $5 a month can make, and the things that we could do with the show. I've got so many ideas, so many cool things that I want to do with our patrons, but we need patrons first. So that's all I'm going to say about that. The rest is just all the basics. Same stuff that I was talking about last week, because guess what? I got us a new listener at work today. Yeah. Guy just said something that sparked a little bit of a conversation. It turned to me doing this podcast every week, and he was real interested. So we got a new listener. Why? Because I told them about the show. Tell people who need to hear the messaging in this show that it is out here, and direct them to the right places. Easiest thing to do is just send them to our website, getunbound.org. That's get-unbound.org. All the episodes are there. Patreon links are everywhere. In the episode description, show notes, blog, everywhere. So very, very easy to find. And you'll also be helping someone to find their path through all of this stuff. So, and that to me is way more important than someone giving us money. But for those of us who already know how good a resource this is and the good that it can do, it's going to start with a few people breaking the ice. So be bold. Get over to Patreon. Throw us $5 a month. We will do good things with it. I promise. And we'll always be accountable for where that money goes. You're never going to have to wonder how we're spending your money, because we're going to tell you flat out where it's going.
Yeah.
So that's all on that. You know, I say it every week. I don't like to spend a whole lot of time begging for money. So I'm going to just leave that right where it is. And then now comes the obligatory appeal to do everything else. And that includes sharing our content. That includes liking, giving 5-star ratings where you can. Wherever you hear podcasts, just make sure that you're letting other people know that you like it, so that they can decide whether or not they want to listen to an episode also. We are on iTunes. We are on Google Play. We are on Stitcher. We are on Spotify. I'm working on getting us onto iHeartRadio, but that has been a little bit slow going. But major platforms that you can find us. Pretty much anywhere where you hear podcasts right now, you should be able to find us. Some of the bigger sites and platforms we're still working on. Some of them have certain standards that we need to either work our way into or adjust so that we can get on them. And I'm doing all of that behind the scenes. It's a lot of work and a lot of hours in an already very full schedule of mine, but it never ceases to amaze me what little things like passion and a good dose of righteous anger can accomplish, because we accomplish a lot with this show. We've done so much with it already with no financial support. And that to me says that we're doing something good. We're gaining new listeners every week. I'm watching our download numbers just skyrocket. And it's amazing to me where this thing is going. So let's keep up that momentum. Let's keep the messaging in the ears that need to hear it. Do what you can on social media and talk about us. That's going to be the most important thing. Okay, onward into our main segment. So tonight I wanted to take some time and talk a little bit about church music. And I mean, it's one of the key things that they use to make sure that your brain is ready for the messaging that they want to put into it. Now, even the last time that I talked about this, I kind of stepped back and listened and thought that I put a little bit more of a sinister spin on it than I wanted to. I want everyone to understand, just make the disclaimer one more time. I honestly don't think that there are people in your local churches running your music ministry who are sitting there in a dark room trying to figure out how they can indoctrinate you better. I do not think that that's what's happening. I think what's happening is that we all just at a certain point in our journey with this, it just got so ingrained in our head, the way that we were going to respond to pretty much anything in this thing called Christianity, that it just started to come naturally. For those of us who had talent with music, figuring out how to use it right just basically came naturally. we were a little bit more in touch with what our own brains were doing with it, and we were able to mirror that back. And that's really all that we were doing. We were demonstrating an understanding of human nature and using that understanding toward a specific end. We were not trying to manipulate anyone. My intention always was with this for it to be something that glorified God, that brought people closer to God. But music is a huge influencer. Now, before I get too deep into any stories that I want to tell about this, I have a tendency to pick up the ball and run with it and forget that somebody is sitting across the table from me. So you've been thinking about this for a couple of days, and I would love to hear what your take is on some of this. Like, well, let's start with why you chose church music as your major. I mean, I know it was one of those things where most of the girls were either in church music or education, and there were more obvious reasons for that. But why spend 4 years in college learning church music in particular?
I loved church music. I loved old hymns. I loved new hymns. I loved everything about it. It made me feel good.
Yeah, music is supposed to do that. It's supposed to evoke a lot of emotions. I'll get into that a little bit later. But yes, the feel-good aspect of it is very, very important here.
Yeah. When I was in Episcopal church, I was like one of the only people, and I was young then, but I liked the old Gothic hymns like Immortal, Invisible, and Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence, and O Come, Emmanuel. I liked all of those minor key type hymns.
I really liked O Come, Emmanuel during Advent because it has that urgency to it. It's in a minor key. We're going to talk about what these things mean in a little while.
However, as I got to learn more about church music in the evangelical sense, it irritated me that there was very little silence at all. You have prelude music, you have the hymns, you have the worship songs, you have like everything, and everything has a background of music to it.
Right, because they can't have you just sitting there thinking for yourself.
Right.
That's it in a nutshell.
It bothered me how much they did that. I always compared the two types of churches, and I thought that the evangelicals are kind of missing the boat on actually having a pause in there for quiet reflection.
So in the Episcopal Church, when you showed up for service, they weren't playing organ music or anything like that?
They would play a prelude, but it was a prelude, and it was usually something classical, like by Bach.
Right.
It had meat to it, so you could sit there and listen to it and actually have your brain be active. Classical music is not like opium. Classical music is complicated, and with somebody like me, I always think when I listen to classical.
Right.
Might not be for everybody.
Yeah, and classical music, if you really want to understand the psychology of music, you got to listen to some classical music, because these people, the people who were writing this stuff were fucking geniuses. They understood human nature really, really well. They understood how the brain works better than I think they even realized they did. And for the same reasons that I was just talking about, where music is just a language in their brain. They know how to speak it well, and they know how to write it well. They're good at the spoken language of the instruments. They're good at the written language of the sheet music. And they know what types of transitions to make and where. They know what to hold back on and then what to let go of later on, in terms of giving the audience that release that they need after building up some tension or building up some expectation, and then things shift considerably. Most of the classical pieces that I really enjoyed were like that. They had distinct parts to them, and those parts were distinctly different from each other, and it gave my brain a lot to do. More modern music doesn't do that so much, but with modern music, it's more about the layering of different things happening in a song. That's why I like bands like Simple Minds and Depeche Mode so much, because there's a lot going on in that music, especially when I'm high on a good sativa and my brain wants to focus in on everything at once.
Yeah.
Well, songs like that are good because there's so much going on in the song that my brain's got plenty to do when it's in that state.
Usually, after the prelude was over, the processional would begin, and this is an Episcopal church. So the processional would begin, and there would be a hymn that everybody would sing. And it was usually about the time of year or what time we were in the liturgical calendar. And all these things had a place. There was a place for everything. And there's a liturgy in the Evangelical church as well, but it has a different purpose.
But didn't the Book of Common Prayer, didn't it have suggested hymns for certain times of the year?
No, the hymnal itself would have
it was the
markings up at the corner. It would say, this is for Advent.
Yeah.
Or general.
And I kind of liked that the Episcopal Church had an official hymnal.
Yes.
That there was consistency there.
Yeah. Everybody had the Book of Common Prayer, and everybody had the hymnal.
Yes, and it was simply called the hymnal.
The hymnal.
The hymnal.
With the year that it was printed.
Right.
When I was a kid, it was the hymnal 1940.
Yeah.
Until 86.
And I'm sure that there have been things put in and taken out and certain changes made over the years. But there is definitely a consistency with that just doesn't exist in a modern worship service.
No.
Modern worship services are pretty chaotic.
Yeah. To me, it felt that way. But it also felt like it was full of energy.
Right. It felt good.
It was a different energy. Mm-hmm. And as a young person, that appealed to me, is that it was different. It also didn't force me to think too much. You were too busy doing things in the Evangelical church. Like with the song service in an Evangelical church, you're always doing stuff. You are singing, you are clapping, you are looking at the song leader.
Or in modern churches, it's not even a matter of watching the worship leader. It's a matter of watching those massive screens.
Yes.
You've got the service itself on one side. You've got the lyrics on the other. If it's a really big church, they'll put the lyrics up on both sides.
Yes.
And never I shouldn't say never, but a lot of times they'll try and match the font in the lyrics to the tone of the song. So if the song is more lighthearted and whimsical, it's going to have a lighthearted, whimsical sort of font that goes along with it. And if it's more serious, it's going to be a more structured and serious-looking font.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen it happen a couple of times, and of course, back in the day when we were first starting to see churches start going technology crazy, it was one of the first things that I noticed. Was that now not only are they going to use the music, but there's going to be a visual angle to this that is centric on the worship service, not anything else, but just visuals that augment what you're singing about.
Right.
I was going to say what's being sung, but participation here is crucial.
Yes.
They need for you to be involved. So it's not about the worship leader up there doing his thing. All of a sudden, you're being bombarded with all kinds of visuals, all kinds of cliched visuals like lighthouses and crosses and doves and all these things that are related to different themes in the salvation message, because they want to keep it in the forefront. This is why you're here. This is what Jesus did for you. This is why you're here. So there's all kinds of emotions that they're trying to evoke with that. They're trying to evoke feelings of adoration, gratitude, love, but also things like fear and intimidation. And I'll get into that a little bit more deeply a little later too. But before I ramble on for the next half hour, anything else that you want to tell us about, your experience with church music? Was there anything significant that happened along the way that got you thinking more about what you were doing, or maybe later on, like after we were out, that you started thinking about some of the ramifications of things that we as a couple did and I did in my many stints in music ministry? Anything that you're thinking about now that you realize was off then, or anything like that?
It was frustrating for me being in church music mostly because I did not have the voice. I did not have that CCM voice.
Right. Yeah, I know
I
what you're talking about.
was more classically trained. I had a high soprano voice. Nothing modern sounds really great. It was frustrating because I had that type of a voice, it was hard for me to imagine doing this job.
Right. Yeah, I get what you're talking about there.
And I was very frustrated when my practicum turned out to be helping the music director do a musical for children.
Oh, okay. I was around for this, wasn't I?
Yes.
This was like your senior year.
Yes.
Okay.
And I was frustrated as all get out because I was hoping to go and do something in a church with someone else.
And what actually happened there? Did you guys do this at the chapel at school or?
Yeah, we did this at the
Yeah.
chapel at school, and it was all set building and I don't even know what I did. I think I did a lot of coordination. I didn't have any musical interaction with any of the people doing the actual play. And I'm like, I didn't come for dramatics. I came for church music, not drama. And I was very frustrated. And I just knew it's like, I'm not going to be able to do this because I don't know how. No one is telling me how to actually do this.
Evangelical religion is built on drama. Of course, it's going to ooze into the song service.
It was one of the salty songbook children's musicals. So it was mostly about putting on a play. It wasn't about dealing with church music and dealing with daily things.
But you see, I could forgive that a little bit because you're talking about a play and not a song service.
Right.
Okay. You kind of need heavier visuals in a play, and especially for something for kids, you need
Right.
a little bit more of that. But the problem there is that you're teaching kids from a very young age to expect certain types of stimulation from the music.
Right. But the point is that this was my church music practicum. This was supposed to train me in everything I'm supposed to do in a song service. Yes.
We went to Valley Forge Christian
Yes,
College.
I know.
We went to Valley Forge Christian College.
I know.
What did you expect?
I expected an education.
Well-
What I got was something else.
I got an education, all right.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
both got an education.
But it's like I left that just sort of longing for sanity. I left that school like hoping that I could like regain some sense of purpose. And that's pretty sad.
There were many things that I looked at that time in my life, and with you being there by my side, it was difficult because it wasn't just music. It was a lot of different areas that I felt
Right.
that way about, where now I said last week that I ran headlong into that project with that church because I was cocky and I thought that I could make changes where they were needed. Well, I feel like all of us when we're young, we approach a lot of things from that angle. And I saw a lot of things when I was in college that I said, when I'm in the ministry, I'm going to do something different with this. So when it came to the things that you were frustrated about with what you were learning and not learning about this and the way that it was being framed with you. So what were some of the things, specific things that you found frustrating that it was in your head, okay, when I get out of here, I'm going to do this differently? What were some of those things?
I wasn't thinking about doing things differently. I honestly just wanted to work in a music department. I wanted to work in the church's music department and help do stuff. And I knew that I was not ready to do any of that when I graduated. There were several reasons why.
Well, yeah, because then they don't really equip you for anything there. It's almost all theory. Almost every class in that place is a survey class.
Right.
So, I mean, there's very little that you can do to expand your own horizons.
Right.
When you're given such a narrow view of a specific subject, it's really hard to look down the road and say, okay, well, this is the way that I would approach this. So I get that. But you said that there were things that bothered you, especially during your practicum. So
It was the practicum just seemed like it was a platform for the leader of our department to have her way. It wasn't like she was doing this to teach us anything. It was more like she wanted to do this. She had a ready group of students who needed to learn something, so she taught them how to put on a play.
right, but that's
That,
only now you're gonna do plays
course.
and cantatas and that sort of thing throughout the course of the year
And
as part of church music, but it's only part of it.
right,
But now I don't know if because this was a husband and wife team that taught different courses
right.
in this area. So I had to take some church music also. I had both of these professors.
Yeah.
And I can remember being taught things like how to conduct in different time signatures and whatnot, how to lead at least a small choir. Did you
Yes.
get any? I would assume you would have had to get some of that.
I got some of that, but I didn't get enough. And the fact that I came into college with fairly mediocre piano skills and I left with worse piano skills because they kept changing teachers on me every single semester. Every semester I had a new piano teacher. Every semester I had to get different books and start all over again. And I had so much anxiety about practicing that I actually could not practice. I would sit in front of the keyboard, not know where to begin, and just cry for 45 minutes. And there's nobody I can talk to about that stuff.
No, of course not, because there really were no on-campus services for anything
No.
like that. And what are you going to do? Just go out and find yourself a psychologist or a social worker who will listen to you? No, that's not even encouraged in that environment.
No.
So that frustration starts building, and what happens as a result of that?
Well, what happens is that I just basically gave up. But my senior year, I just sort of like, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to be able to do this until I'm out of school for at least a couple of years. And then maybe I can think of taking piano lessons again. I have no idea.
Yeah, and it's a tough place to be in, especially when you are a young person and you believe that you have a calling on your life. For me, I would be sitting there and asking God, why am I not better at this? Why have you called me to do this? And just don't seem to be equipping me for it. You're not putting me in front of the right people. You're not helping me learn what I need to learn here. You said these are all things that should start raising questions. And
Right.
I mean, for some people, it takes years. For me, it was immediate. I just ignored a lot of it for years. But the stuff that you're talking about, you can apply it to almost any area.
Oh, yeah.
When you're dealing with, number one, someplace like a Bible college that is already giving you a subpar education. And I mean, I'll bet you dollars to donuts that no one either saw you sitting there and crying at the keyboard or just didn't flat out care.
No, these were practice rooms with closing doors. So
Yeah, I remember. I used to use those pianos all the time.
Yeah.
Just for practice when I didn't want to pull out my keyboard and do all the things with the sound and all of that.
Yeah.
I would just go over there and I would pick a piano, and unless somebody came knocking on the door because they had the thing reserved, I could at times stay there for hours. And I did a lot of perfecting of certain techniques with the keyboard, things that I actually didn't learn or was even cognizant of before I went to college, and had people starting to point out to me different things that you could do with a song, different things that you could do with the bass on the piano to change the way that certain songs flowed or the way certain parts of songs sounded. And when I started learning how to do that, my brain just sort of went into this mode where now I knew what sounded right and what didn't sound right, and started adjusting based on that. But it took being told what to listen for And once I knew what I was listening for, I realized I've been listening for these things all along. So now it's just a matter of taking what's already in my brain and putting it in my hands and making my
Right.
hands do that. And that really was the foundation for pretty much everything that I did in music ministry. And I was involved in a lot of different music ministries.
Right.
You got anything else to say before I get into my story here?
No, I think right now I'm good.
Okay, so I'm gonna start talking a little bit about how I started with music ministry, because this didn't all just happen at once. I wasn't a particularly musical kid, but I did take piano lessons from the time that I was really young. And after I want to say it was only about a year or not even a year in the youth group, I started becoming interested in guitar, mostly because the guitar was more portable. I was lugging a Yamaha DX7 around to youth group and every place else, hauling that thing to every place where I ever played when I was in college. It started feeling cumbersome. And it was long before college, because I came to college with a keyboard and a guitar. Okay. So I had been playing guitar for a couple of years before I showed up at Valley Forge. I wasn't all that great at it, but I got better over time. And then my skills just sort of plateaued. I mean, I can play what I can play at this point. It's difficult for me to get better. I'm good at playing the chords I'm good at, and I'm good at figuring out chording for a lot of different kinds of songs. I have in secular venues, I've done a lot now with like open mics. I'll just go out and play songs that I like, and I still do it, but I do it for me. And believe me when I tell you, it feels every bit as good. It feels every bit as good to show up at an open mic and sit there and entertain drunk people who practically worship you at the end of your set. It feels every bit as good as when you manage to get a lot of people down to the altar because you planned your worship music that well. And yeah, I did gauge a lot of the success in what I was doing with music ministry by how people responded. And again, it's all marketing. It was in my head then, and I didn't even know it, because that really was it. I literally would sit there and I would see all the people that had made their way to the altar, and I would think to myself, thank you, Jesus, for just steering this service and telling me what I should play when. You know, of course, it had to be Jesus. It couldn't have been coming out of my head. So I was always, well, thank you, Jesus. Look at all these people at the altar. And it was so exciting that excitement then spilled over into the music. And there are different formulas. I don't want to get too far ahead, but there are different ways that the music is used, and different types of music, different tempos, different tones, different keys, different key shifts. Does the song transpose? Does it do a good job of raising energy as it goes? See, this is one of the things that a lot of the early composers understood. If you listen to some classical music, you'll hear that it starts out nice and soft and builds and builds and builds to some kind of a crescendo, and then brings it right back down again, almost in a literary way, where you have the rising action, the climax, and then the well, what is it at the end? Come on, you were an English teacher. Falling action and resolution. Okay, there's all of those elements still exist in music because music has its own language. There are musical phrases. There are musical themes. There are all kinds of ways to convey concepts through music. Just ask anyone who has ever listened to Peter and the Wolf. No words, but you know what's going on because the music tells the story so well. Well, in modern worship music, one of the goals is to let the music tell most of the story, and it does. It does a very good job of it. It can be a little formulaic at times. I know that there are certain themes that are overused and have been overused for a long time in worship music, but there are certain groups out there that have really gotten the psychology of this down pat. And when you listen to any of their songs, there are elements that are unmistakable. They start out in a certain way. They build to a certain point, or the messaging in the song has some kind of a shift, or there are different emphases on different words and different phrases so that those are the things that you remember. The choruses are usually pretty easy. They usually rhyme pretty well. And if you don't know the verses well enough, you can just let that indoctrination seep in as you listen to those words. And then as the chorus builds up, now you're excited because now you get to sing, and you sing out that chorus and you raise your hands, and it's all Jesus, God, and Holy Spirit from there on out. And that is by design. I'm going to give you just a little bit of the thought process that I used when I was putting together worship music. Now, keep in mind, again, at that point in time, I'm not intentionally sitting there and thinking, oh, we should do this way. But you know what? There were people that did. And I was in musical groups where people brought up certain psychological themes, I guess, when they were talking about the hows and whys of how they were putting the music together. And that was when I started thinking about it a little bit more consciously, but still, I felt like I had enough of a natural rhythm with this that I didn't have to take my cues from too many outside sources. So when I was the one who was in charge of putting together a worship set, it usually looks something like this. We start out with a few really good energetic songs, like maybe 2 or 3 songs that are going to get people to stand up, clap, and start participating. Because what that's going to do, it's the exact same thing that we used to talk about in Wicca. It raises energy. And this is a real thing. The buzz around you, the excitement of the people around you, it is infectious. And that's why at some point you're going to see 1 or 2 people raise their hands, and then 5, and then 20, and then 60, and then 200. Because now you are raising that energy to the point where you want to be a little bit more demonstrative. And as soon as 1 or 2 people around you decide that they're going to, it feels safer. And you raise your hands, and everyone around you raises your hands, and now everyone is just worshiping their little hearts out. And anyone who doesn't have their eyes closed and looking toward heaven and belting out those lyrics are looking around, and they're seeing the scene, and it's evoking other thoughts, and it's making them start to feel maybe a little bit left out, or maybe like they want to tap into this a little bit more. So the visual element of that before they even turn on a screen, of just seeing people in that environment doing what they're doing, is going to motivate you to be more demonstrative. The same thing when 1 or 2 people just start spontaneously speaking in tongues. Any pastor who reads his Bible and allows this in his church is a fool, but I've seen it many, many times where 1 or 2 people will just start spewing off in tongues, and then all of a sudden there's 100 people spewing off in tongues. Same thing, same kind of evocative measures, and a lot of times it's centered around the worship service. So I would start out with a few really upbeat songs, get that energy moving, and then I'd slow it down a little bit. Not to the point where we're singing slow songs yet, but I'm going to choose a couple of songs with a slightly slower tempo so that now we can get to a cruising altitude and get those brains thinking on the same wavelength. So you get 2 or 3 real upbeat songs, then you get a bunch right in the middle that are more middle of the road. Now, I don't remember precisely how many I used to choose for a standard worship service, but I know that we sang for a while. I'm pretty sure it was somewhere in the vicinity of between 6 and 10 songs, depending on what the meeting was going to be about, how much time we had to spend on the music. And honestly, I was given a lot of free reins, so a lot of times it just had to do with where the Spirit was leading me, so to speak. A typical worship set that I would put together was usually about 10 songs, 2 or 3 in the beginning that were really, really upbeat, even with a little bit of audience participation, like There's a River of Life Flowing Out of Me. You do the Splish Splash, or in our church, we had the Ba-da-da-bums. You remember that?
Yeah.
Spring up, oh well, ba-da-da-dum-bum.
Yep.
So that was just, it was a goofy thing that I only ever saw in our church. Every place else was the Splish Splash with that.
Yeah.
But give people something to do that's specific that they can all join in on like that. And it's lighthearted and it just sort of gives them a little burst of happy. That's even better.
Oh, yeah.
Even it doesn't have to be anything serious. It can be something silly and lighthearted, like a ba-da-da-dum-bum. Okay? And all of a sudden, now everybody's together on this. Everyone's happy, and now you can shove more of that indoctrination in. So after all the splishes and splashes, you sort of bring it down a little bit, and you tell people, okay, you know what? At this point, if you want to sit down, you can. And some of them will sit, and now we want them being more contemplative. We want them thinking about them, why they're here, their surroundings right now. And when you get them to sit down, it kind of makes the room a little bit smaller.
Right.
It brings the center of focus more in on the individual at that point. And that's important because self-examination is a huge part of making the decision as to whether or not you're going to follow Christ and whether or not you're going to stick with it after. So you bring people back to that point where it's more about them. After a little while, I would decrease the tempo a little bit more, get into something that was a little bit more evocative of certain types of emotion, where you would want to raise your hands, where you would want to be more demonstrative about how much you love your God. And what happens at that point, some people will stand up again. And once that happens, it's not long before the entire room is standing again. And now you go from this big corporate worship experience, bring it back to the person, and then remind them again, hey, you're not alone in this. Look at all of these people around you enjoying their faith and loving their God and having such a good time. Yeah, I'm going to stand up again, and I want to be among people again. I don't want to think about myself anymore right now. I've done enough of that. I know why I'm here. And I'm going to just enjoy sharing this moment in the presence of my Savior with these people. And you see, that is really what you want the worship service to do. You want them to start thinking about the greater community, which is the church, because you want them to think about coming back. So you get them thinking about the community aspect of it. Then you get them thinking about themselves just a little bit more. And then you get them thinking about how they fit in to that environment. Because think about it, what you're doing at that point when you have everybody sit down, or I should say when because I had my own way. So this may be different than somebody else's way, but it's interesting what happens because you start out by presenting the big picture and then you pull it in. And then it's almost like lifting a veil. It's like, okay, now I've brought this person back into a place of introspection. I've got them thinking about themselves and where their head is at with their religion. And now, but look around. Look at all of the people who share these beliefs with you, who share this vision with you. So it's kind of like you take it away a little bit and then you give it back. But in the beginning, it's not as much about community as it is about establishment of a certain theme. Okay. The community aspect of it comes when you lead them into a place where they just want to be doing this all together. And that's when you start seeing everybody standing up again, hands go up in the air again, things get very demonstrative again. And all of this is by design. The roller coaster effect with your emotions, that is by design. Because as much as they want to keep you on that even keel, they also want you to remember those pain points. Remember we talked about this in the fear factor? They want you to remember what those pain points are. So that's where those moments of introspection come in, because in those quieter moments, and then there are even songs that, of course there are songs that are designed to make you think about these things. And I'm going back a lot of years because, with all due respect, I haven't kept up too much with worship music beyond being able to do some research on themes and listen to how things sounded then versus how they sound now. To be perfectly honest, they don't sound a whole hell of a lot different.
No.
They really don't. A Hillsong's album from this year sounds a lot like one from 2010 or 2005 or 1997. They sound a lot alike because the formula doesn't change over time. And we've talked about that before too. So most of what I was trying to do there was to get people into this place where they started thinking more about their relationship with God. And let's just be real here. Places where they've screwed up. There was one song in particular that I used to like to pull out all the time that started out with the line, "I have made you too small in my eyes. Oh Lord, forgive me. And I've believed in a lie that you were unable to help me." And then the song kind of picks up a little bit. It's all minor key. And then all of a sudden, there's the pain points. And then when it comes to the resolution, all of a sudden, it's a happy major key. You know what I mean? "But now, O Lord, I see my wrong. Heal my heart and show yourself strong." As soon as you get into that part of it, now you're singing happier melodies, because the beginning part was the pain point, and now here's the resolution. Okay? So all I have to do is acknowledge how big God is and how small I am. And I'm going to start feeling better about myself, because it is no longer I that liveth, but Christ who lives in me. And I like the idea of a big God living in me. I like the idea of that kind of power being able to come out from inside me. So the shift in the theme and the music, just in the same song there, is very significant. And there are reasons why these formulas work as well as they do. Did some research on this over the last couple of days and picked at some of the points that I really liked. I was actually doing some reading a couple of nights ago, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to get into the heavy science of this, because we'll lose people if I start going off on tangents about the medulla and the cerebellum and all. I'm going to talk about this in really clear lay terms. Basically, what happens when you listen to music, and this is any kind of music. We're not even talking about worship music at this point. Any kind of music is going to do these things. And this is why the use of praise and worship music in a modern evangelical worship service is so effective. For starters, music is one of a very few things in our lives that affect all of our brain at once. In fact, there are only two that do this to the extent that music does. There are three, but the second one is it lacks certain aspects. It lacks certain sensual aspects. Number one is music. Reading is said to set off more than one brain center at a time, because especially if you're reading fiction, especially if there are a lot of arcs in the story that you're reading, your brain is kind of working overtime to piece these things together, and it is creating all kinds of images and ideas that keep you thinking about the story. But the only other one out there is sex. Sex affects your entire brain at one time, and in a lot of different ways too, and your entire body in a lot of different ways too. But then again, so does music. I mean, I've gotten chills and goosebumps listening to a pretty song, or a song that I've heard many times and then really heard for the first time. You know, these things happen to me all the time. Happened to me not long ago with a song that I must have heard like a million times, and then really just listened to the lyrics and said, "Oh, so that's what that's about." And I've had lots and lots of moments like that. But music as a medium has that kind of all-encompassing power over your brain. It uses almost every part of your brain at one time to process what's happening. So reading some of my own notes here, it's like it's already getting a little bit too heavy, but I found an article. Let me see if I can find the link to this article for you real quick. Let's see. I think I might have actually closed it, but that's okay. It comes from a site called mic.com, mic.com. So it has to do with music and music production, but it's a really short article. If you want to take a look at it, the link will be in the show notes, and you can take a look at this at your leisure. I'm not going to get into all the heavy bits here, so I'm going to kind of paraphrase it in a layperson sort of way. But one of the main reasons why we enjoy music in general so much is because when you listen to music, the evocative nature of music starts producing dopamine. Now, dopamine is a drug that your brain likes. It makes you feel good. The kinds of feelings that you get listening to good music are a lot like the feelings that you get eating your favorite meal or having sex or doing something that feels good to you. I mean, just the simple act of petting a dog can release dopamine. Having a sip of coffee, which I'm going to do right now, can have that effect. I actually had this conversation with someone recently who was having a hard time getting things focused. I said, okay, so you know what? Pick up your coffee cup. Now feel how warm it is. Raise it to your lips. Feel it on your lips. Taste it. Take the time to experience the coffee. And for the next 5 minutes, you and that coffee cup, that's all there is in this universe. And what that does is it gives your brain the time to not only produce that dopamine, but give you the opportunity to experience what it does to you. And it can have a very calming and centering effect. And I asked this person, well, did you do it? She said, yes. I said, and apparently it helps get things into a little bit better perspective. Just 2 or 3 minutes. I told her 5. 5 minutes with a coffee cup and just focus on the coffee cup. It feels good. It's warm in your hands. It's wintertime in the Northeast. It tastes good, smells good when you get it up to your lips. All of these things produce dopamine and other brain chemicals that stimulate the pleasure centers. But dopamine is the main one. So when we hear a particularly pleasurable thing in a song, you get that quick little burst of dopamine that basically tells you beyond the shadow of a doubt, I like this. I like how I feel right now. You're not always, unless you are purposed to be sitting in your room and just listening to music, you're not always going to be so quick to attribute that to the music, especially in a worship service. You're going to attribute it to a lot of factors, and all of them are valid. The atmosphere, the energy of the other people around you, and yes, the different things that are happening in that song, because different things will tickle different parts of your brain, and you'll get a little bit of a dopamine burst that says, ooh, I kind of like that. And I used to get that all the time, especially with songs that I wasn't familiar with. There would be transitions that my brain would just go, ooh, at. And that was by design. It's supposed to do that. And a lot of the bigger names in praise and worship music figured this out a long time ago, because you can hear it in almost every song that they produce. There are very specific transitions. There are very specific uses of chords. There are very specific uses of a mix of minor and major in these songs, because all of these things get different responses from different parts of your brain. And how much of your brain do you think they want to have control of when the music stops and it's time for your pastor to start shoveling in the indoctrination? They need all of it to be ready. And that is why music is so powerful. Now, one of the things that I found in this article that was real interesting, it says, and I quote, "Our most powerful emotional responses are a result of prolonged expectations and a sudden resolution." This is why a lot of these songs and a lot of these services follow the progressions that they do, because a lot of times it's the slower, more emotional stuff that people respond to. And yeah, they respond to the faster, peppier stuff too for different reasons. But if you go to a church where the music service follows a specific formula, people have been trained and programmed to expect certain things to happen at certain points in that music service. So when they know that they're getting to the real meat of the music, where the messaging is going to become a little bit more serious, a little bit more heavy, a little bit more emphatic, they start responding to that in kind, and not just on a mental level. Some people will start responding physically. This is where people will start spewing off in tongues, and people will start shaking and trembling, and all kinds of other things will happen, because they've allowed the music so far into their brain at that point that it's doing precisely what it was meant to do inside their head, and it's causing them to respond. Well-placed music without a single word attached to it can be a very, very powerful call to action. A very powerful call to action. I mean, come on, think about it. Am I the only one who's ever been out on the highway and noticed that I was way above the speed limit because a song that I liked was playing and it had me pumped up and my energy was up? And now I just sort of kind of want to drive fast, not doing it necessarily consciously, but you look down and, oh, call Doc Brown, 88 miles per hour. Yeah, we need to slow this down just a little bit. And yeah, I've been there a bunch of times where my driving was affected by the music that was playing at the time. My mother even said the same thing at one point. We were listening to one of my Christian albums. We were listening to Petra's Beat the System. And you know what that first song is like with all the synth rocky stuff that's going on, and it's got this pace about it.
Yeah.
Well, one time my mother and I were driving and we were out on the highway and this song was playing, and she looked down at her speedometer, realized how fast she was going, and she was like, "This music's got to go. It's making me speed." Like, this is my Christian rock music, Mom. I mean, what do you want to do? You want me to turn K104 back on? I will. No problem. My mother loved the fact that I had ditched secular music for a while back in the mid to late 80s. She thought that it was wonderful that I was listening to nothing but Christian rock. People, this was the 80s. It was painful to be without pop music for a couple of those years.
Yeah.
I kind of shunned pop music from about 1986 to 1988, and then started realizing that I was part of a culture where this was so pervasive that I wasn't going to get away from it just by running away from it. And that started letting some of it back in after that. But behold, the power of music. I wanted to only listen to Christian music because that was the only messaging that I wanted going into my head.
Mm-hmm.
So I ditched all the secular stuff and was listening to nothing but Petra and Amy Grant and Stryper and just the full gambit. I mean, I had such eclectic music taste. I had such eclectic musical tastes that, I mean, my tape collection was just this Frankenstein cacophony of all kinds of different music. So everything from metal to pop to alternative and everything in between, it was all in there. But it was all Christian. And I got to share a lot of music with people that they had never heard before because they were too busy listening to the radio. And here I was listening to stuff that was pretty innovative for the time. So the longer you withhold that release that I was talking about before, the longer you keep people in a certain place in a worship service, the easier it is to steer them into another direction when you are ready for them to go there. So whatever frame of mind you want people to be in when the worship service is over, that's the type of music that you need to end off with. Now, there have been some speakers who I worked with and collaborated with who wanted upbeat music at the end because they wanted people to be excited because their message was going to be a little bit more motivational and more general. The more personal a sermon is, the more you want the music to be contemplative because you want people thinking about their own situations, their own lives. They want people to feel like this is about them, that it's not just about a community or a congregational thing, that it's about them. And to get people into that place, you've got to draw them back, like I said before, into that place where it's just them examining their own thoughts and their own emotions with the constant bed of pretty music playing behind them to keep steering those thoughts. And this is what you were talking about. Right. No silence. Silence is the enemy here.
Right.
Because when you're just sitting there in the quiet and it's just you and your thoughts, you're thinking the thoughts that you want to think. So that music bed always has to be there.
Yeah.
If the song service is still going on, there isn't going to be a moment of silence in there. Not one. When the song is over, you see, for me, I played keyboards a lot in the earlier years of this. And I knew that when the song was over, that didn't mean the song was over. I still had to keep playing a nice little bed of music to bring us into the next song if we didn't transition to it immediately. And some worship leaders like to stop between songs and let people be demonstrative. And I think that a lot of them like to stop in between so that they can gauge the temperature of the room, basically. They want to gauge what the overall climate looks like and decide, okay, Are things going in a direction that I want to go here? Okay, we're going to forget about this song and we're going to go directly to this one. And again, I think it's a lot more automatic than it sounds like right now. It's more automatic than it is calculated. But when you are used to thinking that way, then you know how most of the people in those pews are thinking already. And if this seems good to you, chances are pretty good it's going to seem good to them, because in the context of that service, people are thinking a lot alike. And that is also a critical part of this, is to get people on the same page in the way they are intellectualizing the way things are going on around them. Because if they can be on the same page intellectually, they can all get on the same page emotionally too. And that is one of the clear goals of a modern worship service, is to bring in that cohesiveness so that, yes, I'm dealing with myself as an individual, but I'm not alone here. The same formula that I talked about before, where first you're part of the crowd, then it's a little bit more about you, and then the greater community is opened up to you a little bit more, and now you're part of this thing that everyone is going to experience together on the same page, on the same wavelength. It sounds good, and in certain contexts, it could be good. But when the goal is to indoctrinate and manipulate, then it's not good. It's just downright dangerous. But that is the goal of a good worship service, is to get everyone on the same page so that they can experience the same message and respond to it in a similar way. You see, this is why we chose to insert certain songs into certain places, and why some songs have those big build-ups to powerful, easy to learn, loudly singable choruses. You go back to the next verse, it brings it down again, and then it ramps it up again, constantly getting your emotions craving that climactic part where you get to sing something that's familiar, that you know well, that the words mean something to you. Over and over and over again, your brain's just being tickled. We also talked earlier about the visual aspect of this and what a lot of churches do, so I won't rehash everything about the high-tech worship service. But I can remember the first couple of times that I saw this, and it was kind of an experimental thing at the last church that we went to in New York, where now they have this nice big facility, and we want to do something modern that's going to bring younger people in. So in went the screen, and we started using it liberally in different parts of the service, but particularly in the worship service. Now, I don't think that the folks at River went as far as manipulating things with the fonts.
No.
I seem to recall that there really wasn't any rhyme or reason to that almost everything looked the same, that the intent there was to basically convey the lyrics so that everybody could sing. So the pastor of that church was like that. He was more practical than most. At least when we were there, he was. The visual aspect of this has evolved a lot over time, because when I first started doing this, it wasn't really a thing. You know, you kind of had to rely on your own charisma to get things going. But in a modern worship service, most church, even small churches, have multimedia systems set up that are used primarily and predominantly during the worship service. They're not used as much during the main parts of the service, during the sermon, anything like that. Although I know that it does get used quite a bit. I know that the pastor of our church in New York used the visuals a lot. He had a more practical idea of what a lot of things that revolved around church ministry and church music were, but he also understood where the tides were turning. And when the screen went in, even I have to admit that it did a lot to augment, and he did a lot with it. That was the point I was trying to make before. He did a lot with the multimedia, and it did help to give more emphasis to certain things in the sermon. It did help for us to understand where he was coming from with certain points a little bit more. So there were good aspects to it, at least in the context of what they were trying to accomplish. But it was never used anywhere near as heavily in other parts of the service as it was in the music service. So now modern worship leaders have the responsibility to not only make their music services sound good, but also look good. This is a concept that started with just providing a good backdrop. Like, you've got all kinds of visual imagery, like crosses and tongues of fire and stained glass and whatever else is going on in your church, whatever visuals there are. For the longest time, it was the atmosphere and the visuals that already existed within that space that were supposed to do the work of keeping you centered. Now, imagine you've got these images in front of you that are specifically designed to center your thoughts on a certain subject, theme, or emotion. Well, that's what they're there for in tandem with the music. They are there to center your thoughts on a specific place, basically. They want you thinking a certain way. And different preachers and pastors want you in a different mindset when they take that pulpit. Another part of this that I noticed quite a bit, even if we as a collective congregation had transitioned out of worship music mode, one thing that I remember happening a lot, especially at Faith Assembly, because there came a point where our pastor, whose thoughts of what was relevant stopped being relevant around 1955, he was a huge fan of the hymns. So after a little while, there was some give and take that went on there, where we were singing modern worship songs, but we would also select one or two hymns. Well, the hymn almost always happened around the time that they were going to take the offering. So now you want something a little bit livelier, okay? You want to be thinking along the lines of positivity. And when that plate passes in front of you, you're going to be a little bit more motivated to put something in it or put a little bit more in it, because they understand how it works, because their own brains work the same way and they think the same way as the people in the pews. So the visuals are an important part of this, as is the tie that music has to memory, because a lot of those visuals, even today, I can think about certain things that I was looking at, people I was looking at, scenes that I noticed during certain songs and certain parts of certain songs. Like, I can think of a couple of songs right now, and I can see the guy who played guitar in the worship band at River. Mm-hmm. I can see him up there strumming that guitar and seeing us at Poughkeepsie Day School for the first time in that setting. And I know what song was playing, and I know what I was looking at. This was around 1990, 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Something like that.
Yeah, we lit out of there in 99, and we've been there for a few years. I want to say this was around 1995. And it was the first time going to this church in this building, okay? And I still remember several of the songs that he played. I remember the solo that he did. And I remember what was going on in the room during most of it. That is the kind of effect that music can have on your visual memory. And that's why things like cantatas exist.
Yeah.
Because I remember some of our cantatas really well too. Mm-hmm. I remember them. I remember a lot of the visuals. I remember things that happened. I remember just even right down to the way the choir was standing on the stage and the scarves that people were wearing. Yeah. It's still in there, and this is years and years later. That is how powerful it is. Okay? So understand that if they are showing you things, images, colors, anything that they want to do on those screens, because a lot of times they'll do that too, not necessarily like psychedelic colors, but things that are supposed to have the same kind of an effect on the brain. Just pretty colors, flowers, sunsets. They'll do all kinds of things to start putting specific images in your mind when you start thinking about specific songs. I think about some of the music videos from that time too. Not worship music per se, but there are videos out there that I can run through my head from beginning to end right now and have the visuals down pat when I think about them in tandem with the music. And these are years and years and years old, long as fuck term memories, okay? Mm-hmm. These things are in there. Granted, I've gotten to the point where I have retrained my brain to think about these things in a different way, but the images and the visuals are still exactly the same as they were then. That is what we're what's the phrase I want to use here, up against? Not really. These are things that we need to understand, because when we understand them, it's not like it's going to stop, and it's not like we're going to forget all of the things that we saw and the impact that it had on us, but we can intellectualize it a little bit better. But memory is definitely a big thing. And I've seen pastors, preachers refer people back when they're giving the altar call to a song that was played during the worship service. And especially if something significant happens, a lot of people start speaking in tongues at one time, or there are other quote unquote manifestations. And often the worship band will take the cue and start playing that song again, because now there's a tie back to before they had the answer to their problem, when they were just dealing with the pain points and hadn't been given the answer yet. And it's like, look how far we've come in just an hour. And people will think along those lines. They'll think that real change has been made and that they've heard something significant, when all the while they've been trained to think that what they're hearing is significant, even if there really isn't a whole lot of meat to the message. They're going to think there is, because now their brain has been told to expect something that has a little bit more density to it than it really does. Let's talk about fear and guilt. Yes, fear and guilt in worship music. You better believe it's in there. Songs with things like warfare imagery, those that are focused on things like the crucifixion and the blood of Christ. These are bloody and violent images any way you want to look at it. There's no way that you can frame torture in the context of love. There's no way that you can frame bloodshed in the context of love. But these songs do it. And even hymns as old as the bar songs that they were written off of are guilty of this, and have this way of just instilling fear and guilt and all kinds of negative emotions. So you see, they don't always want you to feel good. They want you to understand what's been done for you. So songs that have themes like that, where you're dealing with what Jesus did for you on the cross, now all of a sudden, oh God, I feel so bad for what he went through for me, but I'm also thankful. So they pull out the negative emotions and then kind of flip them on their ear and make it seem a whole hell of a lot more positive. The blood of Christ cleanses us from sin. You sing that 17 times. And then you sing a couple of verses in between that spout a bunch of platitudes, and it just keeps coming back to the same thing. The blood of Christ cleanses us from sin. You sing about what a terrible person you are, and then the blood of Christ cleanses us from sin, and what a great God we serve, because the blood of Christ cleanses us from sin, and I don't have to worry about all the bad things I did before, because the blood of Christ cleanses us from all sin. It just keeps coming back and hits the pain points, jabs at them until you just can't help but be happy to be out from underneath all that muck and mire. Or the muck and mire that they've created in your mind for you to be under. More to the point. Loads and loads of this in modern worship music. I mentioned that one song, Be Magnified, that does this. Starts in a minor key with the pain point, goes to a major key with the resolution. But use of minor chords, even in songs that aren't written in minor keys, they often have these subtly intimidating themes that center on things like the end times and God's judgment, the consequences of sin, certain types of sin, especially things like complacency. There's a lot of Christian music out there that deals with the concept of complacency, being a pew sitter or not making it to the pew in the first place, that sort of thing. Not seeing God as being the marvelous, wonderful, majestic being that he is. I have made you too small in my eyes. Well, how small is nothing, because that's what he is. I like to pull out those little jabs once in a while. It's just fun. It does good things to my brain. This next one for me is it's kind of near and dear to the heart, because good, well, not necessarily even good music, but just well-placed music that has the right transitions and the right themes can cause time dilation where you don't even know how long you've been standing there singing anymore. Okay? Much like weed, music can change your perception of time. Good weed can change your perception of time. I know because it's almost 11 o'clock and I can't believe we've been sitting here for as long as we've been sitting here. Okay? Especially the more that you get caught up in the energy of a worship service. The average worship service is over half an hour. I mean, most of the churches that I went to, we sang for at least half an hour.
At least.
And youth group was more like a 20-minute-ish thing. 5 songs, 6 songs. Maybe if the Spirit was really moving me and everybody wanted to sing, I would have up to 10 of them prepared. But we didn't always sing that many. But in some churches, these song services can go on forever. I talked about the first Pentecostal evangelical church that I went to and how they sang these songs over and over and over and over and over again. All Eastern mysticism. They were chanting and raising energy was basically what they were doing. But with an average worship service lasting more than 30 minutes, that's an awful long time to get inside people's heads and get their brains where they want them to be to receive what's going to happen next. So many churches will keep it up for an hour. I've been in churches that were, it's like the worship service was the bulk of it.
Yeah.
And then there was just this really short, disjointed message that came after, and then another hour at the altar. That's the way that some pastors choose to approach this. But usually, most of the churches that I had been to had more of a happy medium with this. 20 minutes, half an hour, that was about it. But people like to sing. They like being in an atmosphere where there's music. I mean, I like going out and just listening to music. I like going out to the clubs and just hearing bands play. So whether you're going to sing or not, it's still going to have basically the same effect. But the more they can get you to participate, the more they can get your brain to participate in the goings on after. And the more you are in tune with sit down, stand up, that's why that's in the liturgy.
Yeah.
Because it refocuses your attention. So the sitting down and standing up aspect of this, it's all just a means of and getting people into the mode of responding. Okay? You're responding to the music, to the beauty of the music, to the transitions in the music. Yes, to the words of the songs, because some of these lyrics, I have to admit, they're beautiful and they are evocative and they are everything that you want people putting inside their heads when they're getting ready to hear the gospel message. These are things that you want in there. You want them thinking on things that are good and decent and holy and of good report. Gauging the music by that is a very, very easy way to get their minds into the place where they believe that this is the absolute best place that they can be in their lives right now at this moment. It's important that I'm here. It's important that I listen to this message. And all of these messages, all of these thoughts are being put in their head as they sing and as they listen to the music, and they don't even know it. The real influencer here is not the Holy Spirit. It is the effect of the music on the brain. It's a very simple yet complex concept. It's nothing but your brain. But there's a lot going on inside your brain when music starts playing, and even more when you start singing, and even more when you start raising your hands, and even more when you start praying in tongues, and the music keeps playing. We talked a little bit about how music can shift your mood, and that is also very much by design. Whatever's going to happen in that service, you want the music to set the mood for it. So let's just say that this isn't a typical church service. Let's say it's a revival meeting. Well, you may never get to the point where you're singing those real slow contemplative songs, because that's not the atmosphere that they want to perpetuate. They want the tone of that meeting to be high energy. Subsequently, the tone of the music also has to be high energy. There's a formula to all of it, whether it's intended or not. I think in some circumstances it is more intended, but I don't think that it's malicious. One of the more dangerous things that modern worship music does is that it not only brings things into focus, but it directs where that focus is going. It's one of the easiest ways to package this malcontent deity's vile nature as one that's gentle, kind, and merciful. How many times do we sing that? What a merciful, merciful, merciful God you are. With all of these lavish praises of how wonderful he is in between. And it just keeps coming back to what a merciful, merciful, merciful God you are. Is this the same merciful God that has that is exponentially more likely to kill you than to bless you? If the Old Testament is any indication, is this the same God that basically went and slaughtered every child in Egypt? We need to understand the power that there is behind these words, especially when they are paired with music, because there's a whole other set of things that happens in your brain when you hear music versus when you hear words. But since the music is engaging your entire brain, it's also influencing how you interpret those words. So after a while, it's not even a matter of questioning whether or not you worship a merciful God. Of course you do, because that's the only way that your brain can see it, because it's been trained to see it that way, not just through music, but through every Sunday school class, through every sermon where you hear all of this talk about the love of God and yet can't read about it outside of the opinions of other people. But a modern worship service can get you to think about that, and it can get you to think about all kinds of other things that are going to come from that pulpit that Sunday. Whether or not they make any sense doesn't matter, because your brain is now making these associations. You see, this particular subject is a little bit less on the personal side than some of the things that we've talked about. So I don't know of anybody, any former Christian who really feels guilty about enjoying worship services, because music is music is music. We're going to respond to it the same way, regardless of what the lyrics are. There's always going to be a real high emotional element to it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have people paying $300 to go see Motley Crue. So normally this is the part in the show where I kind of turn focus to the individual, but this isn't the kind of personal thing that a lot of these other topics have been. Music is a shared experience. We all respond to it in the same way, and that's why if I can give you any kind of advice to end things off tonight, it would be this. If you found yourself duped into doing things, saying things, responding in certain ways, acting certain ways, making a beeline for the altar because you were caught up in a moment where the music sounded good, you're in very good company. It makes you a normal person, okay? We all respond to music in a very emotional way. So this is by design, inside or outside the walls of your church. It's just that modern worship music has figured out what I consider to be a very dangerous formula. Understanding the formula and understanding what it is that they are trying to do helps build a barrier. And that's why I chose this topic for tonight, because I want to teach people how to put up appropriate barriers to the kinds of indoctrination that got them into this religion in the first place and may still be keeping them captive. What's the name of this show? It's called Unbound. And that's what we're trying to help you do here. Get unbound from the type of thinking, or the lack, more to the point, the lack of thinking about this that leads to you being so easily influenced. If your goal is to distance yourself from environments like this, you need to understand how they work. And modern worship music is a very powerful tool, and it is very easy to get caught up. I got caught up in the music many times, whether I was just singing or playing, especially when I was playing, because my brain had more to do, and it could focus in a number of different ways on the music. So from the standpoint of being the worship leader, I feel like sometimes I got more out of it than the people sitting in the pews did, which honestly is not the way it's supposed to go. And I would always pray before we would go out to do our thing, my prayer was almost always the same. I would pray, Lord, everyone in this room is here for a reason. Speak your truth through the words and music of the songs that we're going to play. Flow through our voices, flow through our hands. Be the message to these people. Use us as you will to convey that message, but be the message to these people. And that was the way that I used to pray. So it wasn't even really an ego thing. It's just that I had so much more that I was responsible for. My brain was already opened up a little bit wider to it. And I got chills from just being up there and playing those songs. Some of those songs I still think are very beautiful and really, really evocative in their own way. If they weren't doing so much harm for society, I would like them even more. But they all convey skewed concepts. They all let's just put it right out there. They all convey lies. Not intentionally. The people who write these things have good intentions, but it's nothing but a pack of lies that your brain is now being fed in a way that is designed to be retained at least long enough to be able to agree with what you hear next from the pulpit. And once it's in there, it's just in there. Where does becoming unbound from it come into play? It's understanding the whys. Because we all know we all know the whats. We all understand the whats. We understand what the music is there for. We understand what it does to us. But why? Why does it do these things? Why am I feeling more into things at the end of a music service? Why did I walk away from that sermon thinking about this point and that point and having this song running through my head, whether it was sung during the worship service or not? I had that happen all the time, where I would hear something in a sermon and all of a sudden this one worship song would start playing in my head. And it wasn't always one that we had sung that day, but those connections are so strong that they tie in even when they're not being utilized. So stuff is getting put into your brain that is intended to be stored and used later too. Understanding this will help you put up a barrier to it. Understanding it will help you to feel better about getting duped into certain behaviors, activities, or whatever because the music was good. It's not your fault. It's nobody's fault, really. It's just the way that our brains work. It's our nature. And we know just enough about ourselves to be able to pull this off pretty efficiently. And modern churches do it very efficiently. Whether or not it's their intention to manipulate, well, you know what? I'm not in the hearts and minds of the people that are doing this. I just know what my intentions were, and they were never along those lines, and yet it worked really, really well. I was really, really good at putting together a service that was going to set the tone for what was going to happen next. And I did it with the attitude that I was going to help people hear the gospel message that much better. If one of the things, and I want to speak specifically to some of the people that are just coming out of this or have been out of it for a very short time and miss certain aspects of how they used to worship. Okay. If that's you, then this last little bit here is for you. I get missing this part of it because it's one of the best parts. I'm sorry, the music in a modern worship service is one of the best parts of the service. It's clearly the most entertaining part, but there's the key that you need to focus on there. It's entertaining. Most music exists to entertain. And you can put a heavy spiritual syrup on it that says, but in this instance, we're giving praise to our Lord and Savior who died for us. Okay, well, let's just forget about all the heavy concepts and look at it for what it is. It's a powerful medium that can be used in any number of ways. It is meant to put things in your brain and keep them there long term. I still hear a lot of these songs running through my head just at random times. I'll see something, I'll hear something, someone will say something, and it just sort of triggers something in my head. And one of those songs will start to play. Now, that happens with secular songs too. Okay? Happens with music in general. But the fact that I haven't sung any of these songs in a long time really does say something about the power that exists there. As a little parting shot with this, keep in mind that it's okay to remember. It's okay that these thoughts still jump in and that you still hear these songs in your head. It's okay to still like some of these songs. It's okay to remember them and have fond memories of things that happened in services or that happened with the people that were around you, or the real heavy emotional stuff that happened as a result of these songs being sung, and what they did to you and what they did to your mind, what they did to your emotions, and all of it. Don't be ashamed of that, because if it had that effect, it was doing its job, and your brain was doing its job in the way that it responded to it. Understanding all of that is the way that we get past the belief in the things that it was trying to indoctrinate us to. When you understand the mechanics of this, I almost said motives, I don't want to say motives. When you understand the mechanics of how this works and why it works and why it is so powerful, that is when it starts becoming a little bit more okay to remember things and not worry about the fact that you still think about certain songs and like them. That's okay. What's not okay is continuing to chunk those memories in with things that you believed and start asking yourself, well, gee, am I right about where my head is right now? Once you understand what the mechanics are, what the psychology is, what the science is behind all of this and how your brain responds to it, all of a sudden, it's not linked anymore to all of that other stuff. All of a sudden, it is its own entity, and lo and behold, that's the point in which you find yourself looking back and being okay, more okay with certain things that happened and certain things that you did and certain things that you participated in because the music was good. Now's the time where you get to take those things and separate them from each other. And that's just one more way that you're going to help your mind heal from those experiences. It's going to be one more thing that's going to help you forgive some of the crazy shit that you did as a result of music that you heard. And it's just one more thing that's going to take you a step further toward getting and staying unbound. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Unbound. Show topics are chosen based on their timeliness, relevance, and social impact. Have suggestions for future topics? Email us at unbound.podcast.network@gmail.com with all your comments and feedback. Please don't forget to like, share, and throw a few 5-star ratings our way, and follow us on all major social platforms. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Links to our social pages, as well as a full list of cited sources in today's episode, are listed in the show notes, available at our website, getunbound.org. That's get-unbound.org. If you value this resource and would like to see it continue, please consider supporting us on Patreon at the link in the show description. And be sure to check for new updates every Sunday when we'll come together again and take one more step toward getting and staying unbound.